Imagine, for a moment, that you are 18 years old. The year is 1917. The world is at war, but here in Orange, New Jersey, the sun is shining. You are sitting in a loft with large industrial windows, surrounded by 50 other girls just like you. The air is warm. It smells of vanilla and oil paint. You have the best job in town. You are earning 3 times what your father earns at the factory down the street. You are an artist. You are independent. You are the envy of every girl in the neighborhood. On the desk in front of you, there is a small crucible containing a greenish-white powder. It looks innocent. It looks like crushed starlight. Beside it, a tray of 12 tiny wristwatches destined for the wrists of officers fighting in the trenches of France. Your job is to make them see in the dark. You pick up a camel hair brush. It is incredibly fine, but not fine enough for the tiny numbers on the dial. The number 3 is barely a millimeter wide. If you paint outside the lines, the dial is ruined. If you ruin the dial, you pay for it. So, the supervisor taught you the trick, the specific technique that made the United States Radium Corporation the most efficient studio in the world. He told you that water destroys the adhesive. He told you that wiping it on a rag wastes the expensive paint. Instead, he told you to use the greatest tool nature gave you, your lips. The instruction was rhythmic. It was a dance. Lip. Dip. Paint. You put the brush in your mouth to sharpen the tip. You dip it into the glowing liquid. You paint the number. Lip. Dip. Paint. You do this 100 times an hour. 2,000 times a day. Every time you lift the brush to your mouth, you swallow a microscopic amount of dust. It has no taste. It has no sting. In fact, it barely feels like anything at all. What you don't know, what you can't know, is that you are swallowing the most powerful radioactive isotope known to man. With every single lick, you are turning your body into a living battery. You are charging your bones with an energy that will not fade for 1,600 years. By the time you finish this shift, you are a walking ghost, and the clock inside you has already started counting down. The element of gods. To understand why these girls did this, why they willingly ingested poison with a smile on their faces, you have to understand the world of 1917. You have to understand the radium craze. Today, when we see the radiation symbol, that yellow and black trefoil, we feel fear. We think of Chernobyl. We think of cancer. We think of death. But in the early 20th century, radiation wasn't death. It was life. When Marie Curie discovered radium just 20 years earlier, it seemed to defy the laws of physics. It produced heat without burning fuel. It produced light without electricity. It seemed eternal. The press didn't call it a chemical element, they called it the element of gods. And the capitalists? They saw the ultimate product. Radium became the Bitcoin, the AI, and the penicillin of the 1920s all rolled into one. It was the philosopher's stone. Doctors, who should have known better, prescribed radium water to cure arthritis, gout, and even impotence. They claimed it stimulated the cells. They claimed it jump-started the life force. Rich socialites in New York City would attend radium parties, where the host would mix radium salts into the drink so the cocktails would glow in the dark. There was radium toothpaste to make your teeth whiter, radium cosmetics to make your skin younger, radium butter, radium chocolate, radium lingerie. It was marketed as the essence of sunshine itself. If you were tired, it was because you lacked spark. Radium was the spark. So, when the United States Radium Corporation set up shop in New Jersey, they weren't seen as a chemical factory. They were seen as a cathedral of progress. The man who ran the operation, Dr. Sabin von Sochocky, was a brilliant inventor who had figured out how to mix radium with zinc sulfide to create a paint he called Undark. Undark. A perfect name. It was a paint that banished the night. And to apply this miracle paint, Dr. Sochocky needed delicate hands. He needed precision. He needed the steady fingers of young women. The ghost girls? The girls who were hired at the studio in Orange were the elite of the working class. Take Mollie Maggia. She was young, vibrant, and the social leader of the group. She was the one who organized the dances. She was the one who laughed the loudest. Or Grace Fryer. Intelligent, politically active, the daughter of a union representative. She wanted to do something important with her life. For Mollie and Grace, this job was a ticket to freedom. They were earning $20 a week at a time when most girls were lucky to make $5. They could buy their own clothes. They could help their parents with the rent. They felt powerful. And the workplace fostered this feeling. It wasn't a dark, grimy factory floor with roaring machines. It was a studio. It was quiet. The girls sat in rows, chatting, gossiping about boys, eating sandwiches at their desks. But the most magical part was the dust. Because the paint was a powder before it was mixed, the air in the studio was constantly filled with a fine, shimmering mist of radium dust. It settled on everything. It settled on their hair. It settled on their eyelashes. It settled on the lace collars of their dresses. When the girls walked home at night in the winter darkness, they didn't just walk. They shimmered. They glowed with a soft, ethereal, greenish light. People in the town would stop and stare. "Look," they'd say. "There goes one of the watch girls." They became known as the Ghost Girls. And they loved it. It was a status symbol. It became a game. Before a date on a Friday night, the girls would deliberately sprinkle the dust in their hair to look like magical creatures. One girl, wanting to surprise her boyfriend, painted her teeth with the radium so that when she smiled in the dark movie theater, her mouth would beam with light. They were literally painting their bodies with nuclear waste, and they were laughing while they did it. Why would they fear it? Dr. Sochoki worked in the building. The vice president, Arthur Roeder, worked in the building. But there was a detail the girls missed. A detail that, in hindsight, is chilling. Dr. Sochoki never licked the brushes. The chemists in the back room never touched the stuff. They wore lead aprons. They used ivory-tipped tongs to handle the vials. When the girls asked about this discrepancy, "Why are you wearing protection, and we aren't?" the managers had a rehearsed answer. "It's different for us," they said. "We are handling the raw material. It's too powerful in bulk. But the tiny amount you are using? It's medicinal. It will put roses in your cheeks." So, Mollie Maggia dipped her brush. She put it between her lips. She tasted the grit. And she went back to work. The chemical betrayal. For a few years, the lie held. The war ended in 1918. The soldiers came home with their glowing watches. The girls grew up. Some got married and left the studio. Others stayed, addicted to the high wages. But inside their bodies, a catastrophic chemical reaction was taking place. To understand the horror of what happened next, you have to understand the periodic table. The human body is an amazing machine, but it is easily tricked. Radium sits in the same column of the periodic table as calcium. To your body, radium looks exactly like calcium. They are chemical cousins. So, when Mollie Maggia swallowed that dust, her digestive system absorbed it. It entered her bloodstream, and her body, thinking it was calcium, said, "Wonderful. We need this to build strong bones." Her body took the poison and deposited it directly into the structure of her skeleton. It wove the radium into the very fabric of her jaw, her femurs, her spine. Once it was locked inside the bone, the trap was shut. Radium isn't stable. It decays. As it decays, it fires off alpha particles. Think of an alpha particle as a microscopic cannonball. Inside Mollie's jawbone, millions of these cannonballs were firing every second. They were blasting apart the living bone tissue, killing the cells, and shredding the DNA. The bone wasn't just dying, it was becoming honeycombed. It was turning into a sponge. And because the half-life of radium is 1,600 years, this bombardment wouldn't stop. Ever. Even after she died, the cannonballs would keep firing. But at first, there was no pain. That is the cruelty of radiation. It is a silent killer. The first sign that something was wrong wasn't a tumor. It was a toothache. The horror begins. 5 years after she started the job. Mollie Maggia was now 24 years old. She was still young, but she felt old. She was tired all the time. Her joints ached. She went to the local dentist in Orange complaining of a sore tooth. The dentist looked at it. It was loose. A simple extraction, he thought. He pulled the tooth. But the gum didn't heal. Instead, a dark, fluid-filled ulcer formed where the tooth had been. A few weeks later, the tooth next to it began to rot. Then the one next to that. Mollie was in agony. The pain was so intense she couldn't sleep. Her face began to swell. The infection spread from her mouth into her neck. The dentist was baffled. He pulled tooth after tooth, hoping to stop the rot, but it was like trying to stop a landslide. Then came the day that would haunt the dentist for the rest of his life. He was treating Mollie's jaw, trying to drain the pus from the abscess. He reached into her mouth to gently examine the jawbone itself. He touched it with his finger. And it moved. It wasn't just loose. It was detached. He gripped the bone with his tweezers. He didn't pull. He simply lifted. And the entire left side of Mollie Maggia's lower jaw came out of her mouth. There was no blood. There was no crack. The bone had simply turned to ash. It had disintegrated while she was still using it. Mollie was rotting alive. And she wasn't the only one. Across town, the other ghost girls were falling apart. Grace Fryer went to the doctor because her back hurt. An X-ray revealed that her spine was crushing itself under its own weight. Her vertebrae were fracturing like dry chalk. Another girl walked across her living room, tripped, and snapped both her legs. The bones just gave up. Another girl went to the mirror and saw that the skin on her face was becoming translucent. The light was fading from her eyes. They were terrified. They were 20-year-old girls whose bodies were acting like they were 90. And nobody knew why. The syphilis conspiracy. In September 1922, the infection in Mollie Maggia's jaw sliced into her jugular vein. She bled to death in seconds. She was 24. Her death certificate needed a cause. The doctors were confused. They had never seen a disease that melted bones like this. But the United States Radium Corporation was watching. They were powerful. They were the biggest employer in town. If word got out that their factory was killing girls, their stock would tank. The Wundark brand would be ruined. So, a whisper campaign began. The company doctors suggested a diagnosis. A diagnosis that, in the 1920s, was a social death sentence. Syphilis. They put syphilis on Mollie Maggia's death certificate. It was a stroke of evil genius. Syphilis can cause bone decay. But more importantly, syphilis implied sin. It implied that Mollie wasn't a victim of industry, she was a victim of her own loose morals. It shamed her family into silence. It stopped the other girls from coming forward for fear of being branded with the same scarlet letter. The company washed its hands. It's not the paint, they said. These girls are just unwell. Arthur Roeder, the president of the company, slept soundly. He believed the problem was solved. The bad apples was gone. The girls were quiet. The profits were rolling in. But he made one miscalculation. He forgot about the one thing that radium cannot do. Radium cannot be destroyed. And radium cannot hide. While Mollie was buried in the ground, her body was not resting. 6 feet under the earth, inside her coffin, Mollie Maggia was glowing. The soft, green light was radiating from her jawbone, illuminating the silk lining of her casket in the pitch black of the grave. She was sending a signal. And soon, a man named Harrison Martland would pick up that signal, and he would use it to bring the United States Radium Corporation to its knees. But before justice could arrive, the cover-up had to get darker. The company wasn't just going to ignore the girls. They were going to actively hunt them down. The fake report. By 1924, the United States Radium Corporation had a problem. It wasn't just Mollie. 12 girls were dead. 50 more were sick. The local dentists were talking. The rumors in Orange, New Jersey, were becoming impossible to ignore. Sales were dropping. So, the company did what corporations in crisis always do, they hired an expert to prove they were innocent. They hired Dr. Cecil Drinker, a brilliant professor of physiology from Harvard University. They paid him to come to the factory, examine the girls, and write a comprehensive report. They were confident. They believed their own lie, that the paint was safe and the girls were simply hysterical or sickly. But Dr. Drinker was an honest man. And when he walked into that studio, his instruments began to scream. He found that the dust was everywhere. It was on the chairs. It was on the undergarments of the workers. It was in the air vents. When he stood in the middle of the room with an electroscope, the needle pinned to the maximum. The entire building was a radioactive hazard. He examined the girls. He saw the necrosed jaws. He saw the blood that refused to clot. He saw the bones that looked like moth-eaten lace on X-rays. He wrote a blistering report. He stated, unequivocally, that the girls were being poisoned by the radium in the paint. He sent this report directly to Arthur Roeder, the company president. Roeder read the report. He saw the words poison, necrosis, and hazard. And then, he committed a crime that creates a special kind of hell. He rewrote it. He took the Harvard professor's study and sliced it apart. He deleted the section on blood tests. He deleted the section on bone decay. He kept only the sentences that were neutral. Then, he drafted a new conclusion: every girl in this factory is in perfect condition. He submitted this forged document to the Department of Labor. He lied to the government. He lied to the public. And most cruelly, he lied to the girls. When they asked about the Harvard study, Roeder told them, "The professor says you are fine. The pain is all in your head." The impossible lawsuit. But you cannot gaslight a woman who is watching her own teeth fall into her hand. Grace Fryer had had enough. She was watching her friends die one by one. Her own spine was collapsing. She now had to wear a steel back brace just to sit up. But her mind was sharp. She knew the company was lying. She decided to sue. But in 1925, suing a major corporation for an occupational disease was virtually impossible. The laws were written to protect factories, not workers. Occupational poisoning wasn't even covered by workers' compensation. If a machine cut off your arm, you got paid. If the air in the factory slowly dissolved your bones, you got nothing. Grace went to lawyer after lawyer. They all turned her down. You can't prove it, they said. The statute of limitations is 2 years, they said. You started working there 7 years ago. You're too late. US radium is too powerful. They will bury you. She didn't stop. She was dying, but she was stubborn. Finally, she found a young, ambitious attorney named Raymond Berry. He was fresh, he was hungry, and he was disgusted by what the company had done. He agreed to take the case. But Berry had a massive problem. He had the victims, but he didn't have the smoking gun. He needed physical proof that the radium was inside their bodies and that it was the specific cause of death. The company doctors were still claiming it was syphilis. He needed to prove them wrong. He needed a body. The exhumation? October 1927. A cold, rainy day. Raymond Berry, accompanied by a team of forensic experts and a nervous gravedigger, entered the cemetery where Mollie Maggia had been buried 5 years earlier. The company lawyers were there too, watching like vultures, hoping the autopsy would fail. They dug up the coffin. They hoisted it out of the mud. Now, usually, after 5 years in the ground, a body is significantly decomposed. The soft tissue is gone. Identification is difficult. But when they pried open the lid of Mollie's casket, the coroner gasped. Mollie was looking at them. She wasn't a skeleton. Her skin was still there. Her features were recognizable. The radium in her body was so potent, it had acted as a preservative. It had killed the bacteria that typically break down a corpse. Even in death, the element wouldn't let her go. They lifted her body out. They cut into bone samples. They didn't even need a microscope. They took a piece of her jawbone and placed it on a piece of photographic film in a dark room. They didn't use a camera. They didn't use a light bulb. They just left the bone on the film. When they developed the photo the next day, there was a perfect, bright white image of the jawbone. The bone itself was a light source. It was radioactive enough to take its own X-ray. The syphilis lie was dead. Syphilis doesn't glow. Raymond Berry had his smoking gun. He filed the lawsuit. The headline ran across the country, "Doomed Women Fight for Justice." The strategy of delay. The trial began in 1928, and it became a media circus. The public was horrified. The Radium Girls became household names. But the United States Radium Corporation had one final, brutal card to play. They knew they couldn't win on the facts. The science was undeniable. So they decided to win on the clock. They knew Grace Fryer and her friends were terminally ill. They knew they had months, maybe weeks, to live. So the company lawyers delayed. They filed motions to dismiss. They challenged the jury selection. They claimed their own witnesses were on vacation in Europe and couldn't testify for months. They dragged the hearings out through the summer. Their strategy was simple: wait for the plaintiffs to die. If the girls died before a verdict was reached, the case would likely be thrown out or settled for pennies by the grieving families. It was a race between the slow wheels of justice and the fast decay of the human body. It got so bad that the judge, William Clark, finally lost his patience. He looked at the girls, who were literally too weak to raise their hands to take the oath, and he ordered the trial to be expedited. "These women are dying," he said. "We will hear this case now." The testimony. The courtroom scene was heartbreaking. Grace Fryer couldn't walk. She had to be carried in. She couldn't sit in the witness chair because her spine would collapse. She testified lying down on a cushioned bench. Her teeth were gone. Her face was swollen. But her voice was clear. She told the jury about the lip, dip, paint instruction. She told them about the manager saying it would put roses in her cheeks. Then, other girls testified. Edna Husman told the jury that her legs were so brittle she couldn't sleep under a heavy blanket because the weight of the wool might snap her femurs. Catherine Schaub told the jury that she had lost all her teeth and her jaw was held together by bandages. And then, the final blow. Dr. Sabin von Sochocki, the inventor of the paint, the man who started it all, testified. But not for the company. He testified for the girls. He had left the company years earlier, and now, the poison had come for him too. He sat in the witness stand, pale and trembling. He held up his hands. His fingers were black. Necrotic. The radium had eaten the flesh off his own bones. "It is the paint," he whispered. "It is the paint." He died a few months later. A victim of his own invention. The bitter victory? The company was cornered. The public outrage was deafening. Even the newspapers that usually supported big business were calling US radium monsters. They had to settle. In June 1928, the company agreed to pay each girl $10,000, about $150,000 today, cover all their medical and legal expenses, and pay them a $600 annual pension for as long as they lived. It sounds like a victory. But it was a bitter one. When the settlement was announced, the company lawyer smiled. He knew the math. For as long as they lived. He knew that pension wouldn't last long. And he was right. Mollie's friend, Quinta MacDonald, died that year. Edna Husman died the next year. Grace Fryer, the warrior who fought them to the end, died in 1933. She was 34 years old. The autopsy showed that her spine had essentially turned to dust. They didn't get to enjoy the money. They spent it on funerals. They spent it on painkillers. They spent it trying to make their last days bearable. The second wave. But the story didn't end with Grace Fryer. While the New Jersey trial was happening, another tragedy was unfolding in Ottawa, Illinois. Another company, Radium Dial, was running the exact same scam. The managers in Illinois saw the headlines from New Jersey. They knew the paint was killing the girls. Did they stop? No. Did they warn their workers? No. They lied. They told their girls, the New Jersey girls didn't die of radium. They died of viral infections. Our paint is safe. They kept the lip, dip, paint technique going for years longer. It took another decade and another hero named Catherine Donahue to bring them down. Catherine Donahue sued Radium Dial in the mid-1930s. By the time her case went to court, she weighed less than 70 pounds. She gave her testimony from her deathbed in her living room, whispering into the ear of the judge because she didn't have the breath to speak aloud. She won. And her victory finally changed the laws of the United States. The eternal light. So, what is the legacy of the Ghost Girls? Because of them, the United States established the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA. Because of them, workers have the right to sue companies for unsafe conditions. Because of them, when the Manhattan Project began developing the atomic bomb in the 1940s, the scientists knew they had to protect themselves. Glenn C. Borge, the Nobel Prize winner, wrote in his diary that without the data from the Radium Girls, the scientists building the bomb likely would have exposed themselves to lethal radiation. The Ghost Girls saved the lives of the men who built the nuclear age. But there is a darker legacy. A physical one. If you go to the Rosedale Cemetery in Orange, New Jersey, today, you can walk among the graves of the Maggia sisters and Grace Fryer. It is a quiet place. Birds sing. The grass is green. But if you were to bring a Geiger counter to Mollie Maggia's grave, and if you were to point it at the dirt directly above her coffin, it would click, 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 click. Radium has a half-life of 1,600 years. Mollie died in 1922. It has been just over 100 years. That means the radium in her bones is still 96% potent. She is still glowing. She is still firing alpha particles into the silk of her casket. She is still fighting. And she will continue to glow for another 1,500 years. Long after the factory is dust. Long after the company is forgotten. Long after we are all gone. The Ghost Girls remain. A permanent, luminous warning that the truth has a half-life of forever.